Welcome back to r/neighbors from hell, where people share stories about their crazy neighbors, and if you are new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe to join our amazing community, and without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. The first one is titled, "Neighbors built an illegal pool on my property and damaged my driveway. I got them shut down." Hello all, I just want to start this story with the point that I know that sometimes the property lines of places are not very clear and accidents or misunderstandings can happen. When you have to destroy someone's property to accomplish a goal though, you very well know what kind of horrible person you are and that it was no accident. On to my neighbor who actually owns a company that is a pretty big household name around here. Unfortunately, that has caused him to have an inflated ego bigger than a convention of hot air balloons. He thinks that he is better than everyone else and has no issues letting people know it. For a small example, he has a new fancy sports car that he drives around everywhere. That alone is not a problem, but then he talks to everyone else about how their cars suck in comparison and they probably would never be able to afford a car like his. So basically, the biggest snob in the world and his wife, who does nothing all day, is just as bad. They have more money than they should because he also brags about knowing how to get away without paying taxes for his company. Everyone knows that it is a big thing that celebrities and all rich people have houses with pools. The neighbor did not want to be seen without having one and wanted one installed in his backyard. Keep in mind for this story, this was not an above ground pool. This was in ground and half of their yard had to get a space for it. I knew right away there was an issue when I saw them digging up a portion of my driveway for where the pool was going to be. I could only guess because of their septic tank location, they did not have enough room and did not want to get a smaller pool because they had to be the best. The point is that was my land they destroyed and were planning on building a pool in. Neighbor was not home and the man running construction did not seem to want anything to do with me. So instead I waited and the entire pool was built, some of which passed the property line and in my yard. Due to the ego, we already established talking to my neighbor was going to be completely pointless as he knew what he was doing. He was even giving me sly smiles every time he would catch me looking at him in the pool. So I went to the city and reported that the pool was built on part of my land and I wanted it resolved. The person helping me tried to pull up my neighbor's permits to see how it got approved to cross the property line in the first place. It turns out that those permits did not actually exist and he was doing all of this under the table and without the city's permission. They didn't have to worry about his ego and demanded that he remove the entire pool immediately. Within a few days, his pool was gone and his backyard was just one giant hole until he could get someone to cover it with dirt and grass seed. He was so angry and started yelling at me for doing this because I was jealous that he could afford a pool and I was a nobody who could never dream of one. That gave me a brilliant idea of how to get this guy back even further. See, what he didn't know was that I actually had a decent amount of money myself, so I just did not feel the need to brag about it and buy fancy cars, so I had a good amount saved. I had neighbor eat his words when I got the permits to have a pool installed in my backyard. It was actually going to be used, by the way. It was not just me building a pool to sit there and piss him off. Still, I could see that he was furious he didn't get to have a pool, and now I had one in my yard that I swam in almost every sunny day that spring and summer. I could see him watching and glaring at me, but I could only smile and wave to him in response. The nicer I looked, the angrier he seemed to get about the whole thing. I even had a little summer party one day and the neighbors all came and I did a barbecue and we all hung out by the pool. Neighbor of course did not come and instead I could see him glaring at me through his window the entire day. The whole thing was fantastic and felt like I created the perfect revenge ice cream sundae. The only thing missing of course was the cherry on top that would finally knock the neighbor off of his high horse. Even without the pool, nothing really changed with his bragging and demeaning other people. I needed to hit him in the place that he seemed to store his heart, which was his wallet. I made some anonymous calls to the IRS regarding his company and how he had been evading paying taxes. It was easy since he loved talking about it, and I am shocked he was not found out years ago about what he was doing. I'm not very well versed in these things, but basically he was getting out of it by making hefty donations to an organization that did not actually exist, and it was in his wife's name. Essentially, they were just shifting money around while pretending to get tax deductions for giving charity. Now, that much information though was going to make it a very quick investigation for the IRS to look into Neighbor and what else he was hiding from them. When people tell you to never mess with the IRS, they are not joking around. I got most of the following information from town gossip, but it all seems to add up. The IRS caught him, and Neighbor now owed years of back taxes and fees to them. He did not have the money though, and his company had to file for bankruptcy and shut down completely. I don't know if it was because he was the owner or since he got his wife involved, but the IRS seemed to come for him personally as well. Maybe he was screwing them out of his personal taxes as well, knowing him. He ended up going bankrupt as well and moving out of his house because he could not afford to keep it. He had no savings, no house and no company after the IRS got finished with him. The last I heard was one of the other neighbors heard they were living with family and both of them were trying to find work so they could make some money and maybe afford an apartment. And yeah, ripe stars, who would have guessed that the IRS is capable of inflicting pro-revenge on entitled neighbors? The more you know. Either way, if you still enjoy these stories, I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and also like the video because that would help me tremendously. Thank you so much in advance. And the next one is titled Epic Malicious Compliance or Revenge. Eons ago, when the world was young and dinosaurs roamed the earth, I worked at a popular electronic gadget store called The Sharper Image. Now, keep in mind that the current company called The Sharper Image is not the same company. The original one declared bankruptcy and sold all its assets, including the rights to the name, back around 2008. And I have no affiliation with the post-bankruptcy organization, as I was employed there only until its closure. Those were goodish times. Sales were constant, customers were rich, some were snobby, and I worked with an overall decent team of 5 to 8 people. As time passed and I proved that I was not completely incompetent, I eventually was promoted to lead sales associate, which made me a key holder. I helped open and close the store, did nightly deposits and so on. In a nutshell, I was a discount supervisor with no real authority to speak of. Now, the old boss was a great guy, pretty relaxed environment, flexible in scheduling and overall well liked. Well, he let me duck out of work early with him once so we could both hit the casino, and he taught me how to play craps. Those were fun times, and then one day old boss left. He left the company, he left the city and moved to the other side of the state in the USA. The store's assistant manager got a big fat promotion and became the new boss. Now, as new boss assumed control of the store, a complete store assessment was performed to give him as complete a picture as could be painted of the store's status. And things did not look good. Old boss was a bit too relaxed with his duties and several thousands of dollars worth of large merchandise was nowhere to be found. Large toys such as underwater scooters, underwater propulsion vehicle, $300 a pop, Roomba robotic vacuum cleaners, $500, expensive air purifier systems, $300 to $550, all missing without a trace. It became widely believed, but not proven, that old boss was swiping merch, selling it, and using it to fuel his gambling trips after work, and our store became a high theft location as a direct result of this. Now, new boss dealt with this by implementing standard security procedures. Locking up small, easily stolen items in a secure area, daily inventories of high-priced items, logging and reporting any discrepancies, restricted access to electronic items to only management and lead associates, all understandable and reasonable actions. Theft was still existent, but large, bulky items no longer walked out of the store, and small, expensive ones were mostly under lock and key. Things should have been good there, however, new boss wanted to throw around his newfound authority and enjoyed kicking up his feet and doing literally nothing during his shifts, with periodic bouts of walking the sales floor to micromanage anything that caught his eye. He would sit in his office reading a newspaper for 4 hours and come out to tell us to re-clean the sales tables or display shelves that were cleaned 20 minutes prior. He would duck out of work early on a Friday afternoon and forget to put in the payroll so that employees would get paid for that week's worth of work and proceed to call the night closer, which was always me because he had a nightlife to walk the hourly employee through the process. He would skip out on opening the store the following day because he was hungover and made the night guy, me, come in the morning after to open the store. While annoying, these are not that bad and I tolerated them with quiet patience. After all, I still kind of enjoyed the job and nothing better popped up yet. But despite all my quiet acquiescence, new boss somehow got it in his head that he did not like me. There was never any non-compliance with any of his orders, work was done quietly and efficiently, and I had never made any waves during my time there. However, new boss began to actively despise me. The worst work shifts, unobtainable sales goals, refusal to replace leaving staff, and pushing that workload onto me. He made it abundantly clear to the entire staff that he did not like me and was doing his damnedest to see me fail, so he would have reason for disciplinary action. At one point, I became the only person with the responsibility of managing the high theft stock. This required daily inventory of a small locked stock room with thousands of dollars of pricey electronics. Cell phones, Bluetooth pieces, anything we had that someone, though, could easily disappear was kept in that room. New boss was too lazy to ever catalog the room, and new assistant manager was trying to keep the place from falling apart during the day shifts, so it became my responsibility alone. If anything went wrong, only one person would be held accountable. Well, my inner paranoid self decided I would keep a hawk's eye on this room and made it a point to log every item in that room, complete with serial number, every day after the store closed while the other employees were cleaning up the storefront. Eventually I noticed things starting to not add up. Bluetooth earbuds, still primitive and expensive in 2008, missing. Fancy sunglasses, being sold in a gadget store, were coming up short. Fancy stuff that had no log of being sold that day was not in the store. Whenever these discrepancies were found, I immediately reported them to new boss just like he wanted, but never seemed to do anything about it. This continued intermittently over the course of a few months. Then new boss began trying to hold me responsible for every missing item from that room. Now, it is true that the regular salespeople needed a key holder to access the room, but even I could not be there all day, every day, to open it for them. I was able to defend myself by arguing that between myself, the assist, manager and new boss, I cannot be the only one opening that door to pull out merch. Especially if items went missing on my days off, but the writing was on the wall and I knew I could not keep that semi-flimsy explanation as my only defense. Things came to a head one day when I noticed new boss pulling out his cell phone, removing the SIM card and placing it in a new phone we just started selling, claiming he was using it as a floor demo to show customers the new features. We have done this with other products before, but never cell phones. You don't open a sealed box with a $600 phone just to demo it. The company ate the full cost of an item marked as store demo and removed it from their inventory, so those cannot be resold after they become a demo item. The company's corporate minions said it was bad for profit margins if every store would mark out a cell phone, so no phone demos. Yet here the boss was playing with a new phone, and when it was time for him to head home, he left, new phone and all. Now, I'm pretty sure new boss had such a low opinion of me that he did not even view me as a threat at that point. I was just some early 20s guy who was his personal punching bag, so when he left the store still holding the demo phone in his hands on his way to the nightclub, I had an idea. I hopped onto the business computer in his office and shot off an email. to the district manager who handled our store and about a dozen others across several neighboring states. District manager knew me, he knew his minions, and he knew all the stores that were under him. I messaged him as a lowly senior sales shift leader and asked him what the process was to store demo a cell phone. I did not ask if you should, I only asked how. After all, I'm a lowly shift lead. I'm just following my manager's directions when he said he was out demoing a cell phone. I mentioned the recent discrepancies in our high theft room and asked for advice on how to deal with that, since new boss does not give any feedback when I report it to him, and generally I make the email sound like it came from some young naive teenager, when I am fully aware of what I am doing as a fed-up 20-something-year-old. I send the email and go home wondering if anything will happen. The next day, I roll into work at 2 PM for my regularly scheduled night shift to find all the regular sales clerks hanging out in the front of the store and avoiding the back office like the plague. They whisper that the back office is off limits because the district manager took a 7 AM flight from Ohio out to our store and rolled in just after the store opened, just to catch new boss reading the newspaper and playing on his new and unpaid for phone. 4 hours of closed back office later, new boss walks out carrying a box of his personal belongings, and district manager is on the phone convincing a nearby sister store manager to do double duty until we get our store situated. Over the next week, the ex-new boss called several of my coworkers, accusing them of ratting him out and getting him fired, screaming at them and calling them horrible employees. He systematically called every employee at our store except me. I only wish I could have seen his face when they all, rightfully, denied any involvement and when he was forced to realize his designated floor mat was not to be effed with. Later on, assistant manager privately tells me he suspected new boss of stealing the high theft items because he had a quiet drug habit, but nothing was ever proven. And the next one is titled, I paid for an hour. And by the way guys, this is not a traditional neighbor story, but you will see what I'm talking about. Not me, but it happened while I was at a trade show in Vegas to the guy in the booth next to us. This was about 15 years ago. At the time, we were a small company, and because of this, we only afforded the cheapest booth way in the back. We refer to it affectionately as the slums. All the big players had huge booths up front while we were in one of the last rows in a 10x10. If anyone has set a booth up at one of the big trade shows, you know the unions run them very hardcore. Any little extra you want is a cost. You can't do anything yourself. It is amazing even at that time what things cost. Internet power, carpet for your booth, etc. Well, the first day is all vendors and a crap show. Some people are there all day setting up. We showed up at noon, spent about 30 minutes setting up, and then went off to get a drink. We met the guy next to us who was all by himself as we were leaving. We shot the crap for a minute and then bounced. To see a trade show go from the vendor setup to a functioning show with booths and everything is a sight to see. The first day is dodging forklifts, people, and getting lost because there isn't much order yet. The next day things are cleaned up, signs are up, and everyone is ready to go. So we stroll in about an hour before the start the next day. We have our coffee, sit down, and we're about to talk about the antics we had the night before when the guy we met yesterday asks us if we want to hear a good story, and he begins. So what the unions do at the end of the day is pick up all the garbage and vacuum all the main aisles. What they don't do is clean up each individual booth. That costs extra. Our neighbor set up his booth and then noticed his 10x10 carpet was a mess. He leaves his booth in search of a vacuum cleaner and eventually tracks down a union guy and asks to borrow a vacuum cleaner. The guy says he will send someone over. Great, an hour later a union boss shows up and says he has to pay for a minimum of an hour for someone to vacuum his booth. Our newfound friend says this is ridiculous since it should take less than a few minutes. The guy says sorry, those are the rules. Our friend is pissed but his booth is messy and so he agrees. Another hour goes by and a guy with a vacuum cleaner and work order shows up for him to sign. Something like $100 to get his booth vacuumed. He signs and the guy gets to work. Literally a minute or two later and the guy is done and starts to pack up. Our friend asks him what he is doing. The guy says his work is done. My friend tells him it is not. He is paying for an hour and he will get his hour. Union guy is pissed and goes to get his boss. A little while later, the boss comes back and asks what the issue is. My friend shows him the work order, says he is getting charged for an hour and the guy has only spent about 2 minutes worth of work vacuuming. He wants his full hour. The boss looks at him, looks at the paperwork, sighs, looks at the union guy and tells him to get back to work. That guy vacuumed the carpet for an hour while our friend watched. He said it was the biggest F you back to them and well worth the money for the cleanest carpet at the show. To this day, it's a story I think of when I go to trade shows and see the small 10x10 booths. I still have a good chuckle. Next one, mailbox drama. Hi all, I don't know if this qualifies as neighbors from hell, but it was sure annoying. I live at the end of a cul-de-sac, so my frontage is less than 40 feet. I have about 5 feet of space for my trash and then my double drive, then a couple feet where my mailbox is and then 3 feet to the light pole that is the property line divider. My next door neighbor was a single mom with boys, no issue, so was I. Mine is grown though. Then my neighbor placed a basketball hoop and base in the 3-foot space between my mailbox and the light pole on my property. It became the neighborhood hangout. Within a week my mailbox was dented. I took a picture, another week and I came home and it was knocked over. I took a picture. I asked her and her kids to try to be more careful. I got some quickcrete and re-cemented it. Weeks later it is on the ground again. I asked her and her kids to try to be more careful. I once again took a picture and I re-cemented it again. Within a week it is on the ground and tossed back into my yard, because it must have been in the way or something. So I took a picture, re-cemented it again and asked them to move the hoop. She said it is not her kids, it is the neighborhood kids and she cannot do anything about it. During this wonderful period, we each had met our SOs, who get along well by the way. Now I was also dealing with noise from them. They planted rose bushes on my side of the property line and I've had to return their dogs to them multiple times and just tossed their dog poo back into their yard. The end of the standoff came when they didn't just knock over the mailbox and post, they broke the post. The wood was splintered and not salvageable. I took a picture, I asked them to replace it. She was all apologetic at first and then an hour later showed up at my door and said her new husband said it was not their fault because it was the neighborhood kids. Oh really? I started looking at fences. My backyard is completely enclosed with a 6-foot privacy fence, so I was looking for something to tie into that and go to the curb, no sidewalks. Before I built the fence, I wanted an accurate survey, so my SO made some calls. Turned out the best surveyor in town was the same guy that laid out our subdivision 30 years ago. He pulled all his old notes and was able to quickly find the markers and mark the property line. Meanwhile, the neighbor watched from her porch. They got the point, especially when my SO and I tipped over their basketball hoop of our property and into the cul-de-sac and then dragged it over to partially block their driveway. We never did build the fence. They moved the hoop to the other side of their driveway and replaced my mailbox post. Her SO did ask that we would notify them before building a fence so they could move the rose bushes. And we said okay, so they are still there and we all studiously ignore each other. Think someone wants to go out of her little drawer apartment, right, Disney? You want to go out? Or you want to stay in? Ja, och go back in. Disney. Let's try first. Oh. Think someone is ready now to eat and scratch her pet. Can you get out yourself? Wow, very good, Disney. No scratch on my carpet. Disney, that's not the scratch pad, it's a carpet. So now she's ready, I think, to go back to her room. Yeah, she's waiting. The way back. She's also getting so long. She's not only getting wider, also getting longer. And someone was charging her laptop here, aka my girlfriend. Always like this. Sometimes when she goes into her room, she forgets to scratch after sleeping, so I put her on the bed and then she starts scratching. And yeah, we're now trying the special cat litter. Let's see how it goes, if she likes it or not. The tofu cat litter. And yeah, my girlfriend's pretty confident that actually you can flush it in Thailand without problem. But I guess we will see how it turns out. We also got her some new cat food from the Royal Canin brand. Yeah. Not Disney. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching, and I see you again tomorrow. And ripe stars, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you still cannot get enough of my content, then I would highly suggest to check out my endless binge watch playlist, which will soon show up in the left corner of the screen. In addition, I would really appreciate it if you could not only subscribe to the channel, but also turn on the bell notifications, which you can do by clicking on the little bell icon right next to the subscribe button. This will help my channel tremendously, and this will make sure that you don't miss any of my videos. Furthermore, if you want to see additional ripe content that I don't post on YouTube, then I would suggest to head on over to patreon.com/ripeyoutube for more than 50 exclusive videos that you will not see anywhere else. Thank you so much for your amazing daily support, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.